What's up, guys? It's analyst, and I should say Joe, because we got two analysts. What's up, guys? We're back this year with some more game reviews. So we're going over every single game for every single week, or at least that's the plan for this season. We got some matchups coming up. We had a matchup last night, first kickoff of football. Pretty excited to look at that. But first and foremost, I want to let you guys know that you can go on Underdog and you can use code ANALYST, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $100. So if you guys want to take advantage of any of these point spreads, if you guys want to take advantage of any of these player props or guys that you like, you can go on Underdog. You can use code ANALYST, and they'll match your first deposit. So pretty cool. Another thing, Luke, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Got a slightly new setup here, but still ready to cover all the games this week and all the games for all the weeks, I guess.
A different corner of the same room, as they say, right?
It's actually the same corner of a different room.
Yeah, there you go. But now, what do we think about last night, right? So, in terms of fantasy, what are you guys doing? You got like David Montgomery, you got Amon-Ra St. Brown in any leagues? What's working for you after last night?
Yeah, I do have Amon-Ra St. Brown in a couple of leagues. I liked drafting him. He tended to go a bit earlier than I wanted to take him, but he did exactly what we expected of him. We saw it last year. He led the Lions in targets, caught, I think he had 6 catches on 9 targets. Solid, scored a touchdown. Seems to be routine with him. Not much else working for me besides that. I do have a league. You're in that league that I played against David Montgomery and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Ooh,
that was tough, but I didn't have anybody of note going, so I think I should be good there. But yeah, the Lions offense looked about as I expected. The Chiefs offense, obviously Kelsey wasn't there, so it wasn't really a proper indicator of what's to come. It was a total mess. I mean, Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney getting killed on the internet.
Not even from Mahomes' side either. Mahomes looked fine.
Right.
It's just Kadarius Toney, when he drops 3 passes and one of those turned into a pick 6, it doesn't really help the case for the Chiefs offense here. But I just want to pull up some interesting numbers from Dwayne McFarland. He's from Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. He comes out with this report every week. And what we found from that is Jahmyr Gibbs played 29% of the snaps. He had 21% of the offensive attempts, and he had 25 route participation. So playing less than 30% of the snaps, not ideal. He ended up with 8 points even by doing that. So Gibbs is definitely someone who we feel is going to get an increased role as time goes on. He only scored 8 points last night, but we're expecting more out of Gibbs. Now, what was really hopeful was Sam Laporta in week 1. I mean, a great debut for a rookie tight end. He had a 72 route participation rate, and he had 19% targets per route. Both are great measurements for a tight end, and a rookie tight end in his debut, nonetheless, is awesome. He got a ton of targets. He seemed to be more of Jared Goff's guy as the game went on, which I think is only encouraging for his usage going forward. So Sam Laporta is going to be a top waiver pickup for sure. If you need a tight end, he's looking like a guy who's going to come through. David Montgomery had a little higher usage than I think we were all hoping for, at least. Not so much what we didn't expect, because you look at this Bears offense and how early they are into the season. Of course, guys like David Montgomery are going to get more usage, but he wasn't very efficient. Like, you saw a lot of times he touched the ball, he just kind of ran into the line and got 2 yards, 1 yard, no yards. So we'll see how that progresses. On the Chiefs side, though, we talked about Travis Kelce not being there. Rashee Rice came out of nowhere. We had heard he was not going to be very involved. We had heard that Kadarius Toney is this team's wide receiver 1. We had heard that Sky Moore is going to play a pretty big role in this team. None of that came true. Rashee Rice came through. He got a touchdown. He got a couple targets. So what do we take away from this? Is Rashee Rice going to be the top waiver pickup next week? Because I feel like there's going to be an overreaction to what he did. And it sounds like Patrick Mahomes still has faith in Kadarius Toney. So what's your takeaway from the Chiefs side of this coin?
Yeah, well, funny you mentioned top waiver pickup. I think Sam Laporta, who you just talked about, might even get picked up a little more. But yeah, I was not expecting that out of Rashee Rice. As you said, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. We've heard all about how they're going to get used. It feels like every offseason there's a story about how Justin Ross is really the Chiefs wide receiver one, and he got one target, I think, in yesterday's game. And they did say they were going to ease Ross and Rice into it, but they didn't really ease Rice into it. He was tied for the team lead in targets with 5. Obviously, you're spreading the ball around without Travis Kelce, but for a rookie in his first ever game in the NFL to be tied for his team lead in targets, especially when it wasn't really expected, I think there is something to be said about that. Now, I'm not really chomping at the bit to grab him on the waiver wire or anything, because as the first thing I said was the Chiefs playing without Travis Kelce, you can't really read too much into that situation. That was a weird game for them. We haven't seen them play without Travis Kelce, and I don't even remember how long.
So it was
definitely
strange.
strange.
Since the last time he missed a game due to injury. But he's missed other games in terms of I think like week 18s, those type of things where they already got the number 1 seed locked down, so they don't need to play it. So, but yeah, first game since the injury that he's missed is 2014. Kind of insane. On top of that, while we're on the topic of dropping or picking up players, Kadarius Toney, how soon, and I'll include Sky Moore in this conversation as well, how soon are we saying, okay, week 1's done, I'm dropping Kadarius Toney. Week 1's done, I'm dropping Sky Moore. They showed out and they did absolutely nothing, because it sounds like the team is still, or at least Patrick Mahomes, is very insistent that Kadarius Toney is going to go up from here. I mean, it's pretty hard to not go up from here, but it is Kadarius Toney, so anything's possible. But I have hit Toney in a couple leagues. I noticed that the later that my drafts were into the offseason, the later that Toney was going. So I used to have to take him as like my wide receiver, like 4 in like 8th or 9th round, just because of the hype around him being the wide receiver 1. But near the end, I was taking him with like close to my last pick in a couple of drafts. So is it worth dropping Toney, or do you still say hold on and we'll see if he kind of turns it around a little bit? Because I think for these things, I like to do that timeline.
Yeah. I wouldn't really be dropping him right away. I'm in general against just giving up on a player you drafted after 1 week. It kind of stinks to put it this way, but Kadarius Toney does have a pretty vast injury history. Could always use the IR spot to continue to stash him and open up a bench spot if he does get hurt. That's a way that you could keep him on your roster without him taking up a spot. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes seems to have faith in him, although the faces he was making at him during the game yesterday kind of said otherwise. I mean, the pick 6 was his first drop, and they kind of just, walked off the field. It happens. And then the second one, he just got a death stare from Mahomes. And by the third time, that was the play that he had a wide open first down in the fourth quarter. I think they were losing by that point. Toney could have kept the drive alive, and it was just a back-breaking drop. It was absolutely awful. I think the next play was the false start that they finally called. And that
John Taylor,
and that just threw them all for the loop, and it ruined that drive, kind of ruined the game for them, because that's the type of drive that no matter what happens in the game, you're expecting Patrick Mahomes is going down the field and winning you that game. And Kadarius Toney just killed that drive. So, again, Patrick Mahomes says he has faith in Toney. I'm not really buying it, but I still think it's too early to give up now. We've seen 1 game of NFL football this season. There's a lot to go.
Absolutely. And, something that we're also hopeful comes back is Travis Kelce. So Travis Kelce, we mentioned, first game he's missed since 2014. The big question this week is, what do? You drafted Travis Kelce first round. There's a chance you probably didn't draft another tight end thinking that you have Kelce in your set. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Last night, we saw Noah Gray. He got some involved. I think he had 3 catches for about 30 yards. Then Blake Bell scored the touchdown. And you know what I mean? So I don't like Noah Gray. Don't expect that Noah Gray is going to be Kelce. Let me rephrase that. I don't hate Noah Gray as a person. The way I said it, it made it sound like, hey, I just don't like Noah Gray. But yeah, no. So what I would say is Travis Kelce replacements that we've been looking into. 1 being Juwan Johnson, 2 being Chigo Okonkwo, 3 being Gerald Everett, and 4 being Hayden Hurst is more of a deeper option. So we're going to go more in depth about each of those options as the time goes on. But let's just give a little bit about, we got someone's backing up right in front of the house. How great is that? But yeah, let's give a little piece on each of those guys, a little preview for what we're going to talk about later. So I know you're big on Juwan Johnson and Chigo Okonkwo in that matchup. I believe they're playing against each other too. What are your summary thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a great first look to see how they're used and who is going to be the best Kelsey replacement. I think they're probably the two best options out there right now, at least. Juwan Johnson's been pretty quietly putting together a few good years now in New Orleans. He's been a good like separator, decent player for a while now, but last year he really started to get used on offense. And he took that job away from Adam Troutman, who is in Denver now. They completely got rid of him. I'm looking forward to seeing how they continue to use him now that Derek Carr's the quarterback. I mean, Derek Carr had Darren Waller for all those years. And even when Darren Waller was hurt, Foster Moreau, who's also in New Orleans now, started playing a role when Darren Waller was hurt. So Derek Carr likes his tight ends. Juwan Johnson's there. If I had to pick one, I would probably pick him. But I also loved Okonkwo in the draft, and I think that he is a great player. It's just a volume thing with him in Tennessee.
Yeah, and volume, especially because I feel like he was everybody's sweetheart this offseason until they picked up DeAndre Hopkins, which makes total sense. You bring in a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, it's going to take away from guys like Chigo Okonkwo. So yeah, all that makes sense. Hayden Hurst, I think he's an interesting option because of the lack of targets for that Panthers offense right now. DJ Chark ruled out this week. Adam Thielen coming off injury. Jonathan Mingo still a rookie. So I think they might have to lean on Hayden Hurst a little bit. And we know that rookie quarterbacks sometimes lean on tight ends. Hayden Hurst also a little bit of a comeback or revenge game, you want to call it, against the Falcons, who I guess were a catalyst for kind of ruining his career a little bit. You could say there were high hopes for him in Atlanta. He didn't really come through there, and then it kind of tailwinded into where he is now in his career. But outside of that, the only other option that we really want to hit on is Gerald Everett. It's a matchup. You got Chargers against Dolphins. We'll talk more about the matchup later, but it's a high-scoring offense against another high-scoring offense. He was top 5 in red zone targets last year. Why not take a shot on a guy like Gerald Everett? He has a chance to score you a touchdown this week. So with that being said, Luke, it is time to talk about week 1 while we're both apparently in a parking lot because I got so much going on in the background, but it's okay. We got Browns versus Bengals. Let's kick it off. So Cleveland Browns, Deshaun Watson making a comeback. And by the way, I also want to preface this by saying there's a lot of unknowns. This is week 1. There's a lot of dart throws. There's a lot of what do you think this rookie's gonna do? Like yesterday, Sam Laporta being as involved as he was, Rashee Rice being as involved as he was when we were told he wasn't going to be, Jahmyr Gibbs not being involved after hearing this whole offseason that he's gonna be like this team's RB1 and be in on every play. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things that we're gonna have to try to figure out together. So with the Browns especially. Elijah Moore being the new guy in town. What is that going to look like? Behind Nick Chubb, is Jerome Ford going to be involved? Is Pierre Strong going to do something? Demetric Felton going to be a consistent part of this offense? So quarterback-wise, matchup-wise, Deshaun Watson, not really too much to say against this Bengals team. Nick Chubb, though, against this Bengals defense, what do you think? Top 5, top 3? Where do you have Nick Chubb this week?
Yeah, Nick Chubb, and you'll see this is going to be a pretty common theme, especially in this game, but a little bit with every game, is I'm pretty much just playing my players where I drafted them. So if you drafted Nick Chubb as, the top 5th, 6th running back off the board, obviously you're starting him, and that's about where I would expect him to land. The Browns might have to rely on him. Depends on the way the game script goes. These games are usually either the shootouts you're expecting them to be or the scores like 10-7. Like what is going on with Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson, and they're not scoring. But yeah, especially both teams, but especially the Bengals. You're playing all your good players. Obviously, there's not enough room for, say, Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, and another backup running back to all produce in one game. But you got to pick your spots. And as it's week 1, there's not really much information to go off of.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the rest of this team, a guy like Njoku, you're probably starting him based on where he was drafted. If you have Njoku as your starting tight end, chances are you don't have many other great options. Wide receiver wise, I think Amari Cooper is a go for me. Elijah Moore is going to be a no for me, just as we kind of assess what his role is going to be on this offense. And on the Bengals side, Joe Burrow, he's fresh off this huge contract that he just received. He is going to play. He is practicing, so he'll be in there. I think Joe Mixon's a great person to play in this game. And then wide receivers, you're throwing in T. Higgins, you're throwing in Jamar Chase. Irv Smith, I feel like he has not been talked about at all this offseason. And we're going to continue that trend. We really don't want to talk about Irv Smith. There's not really too much to say. So that kind of rounds out that game. I want to talk about the Texans versus Ravens. So Texans side, you have C.J. Stroud making his NFL debut for the Houston Texans. He's going to be paired up with you got Dameon Pierce. What is this wide receiver room going to look like? Who on the Texans side are you willing to put in your lineup this week?
Well, I think you know the answer to this question. Well, Dameon Pierce, I'm putting in my lineup again. If I drafted him so high that he's in my starting lineup, I'm starting him. Maybe guys that you draft later, such as a Jamal Williams, I guess, would be an exception. Jamal Williams is what we'll get into him later. But
Jamal Williams.
As for the Texans, yeah, just a name to throw out there. As we get to the Texans receiving room, the guy I've been naming all offseason is Dalton Schultz, and he is the only dependable veteran, depending on how you feel about Robert Woods. I'm not very excited about him. Only real dependable veteran option in that Texans receiving room. You have John Mechie, who's never played a snap of NFL football. You have Tank Dell, who's never played a snap of NFL football. You have Nico Collins, who's had his moments, but I don't think he's shown that he can be a dependable fantasy option at this point. Dalton Schultz has in Dallas, and I think that he was getting overlooked throughout this entire offseason from a fantasy perspective for exactly this reason. I mean, he was going as the tight end 12, 13 in some drafts. So pretty much every single fantasy draft that I wasn't able to land a Kelsey or a Hawkinson or a Waller or a Kittle, Dalton Schultz is my starting tight end. So I have him in about 3-4 of my starting lineups as we sit here. And even a couple smaller leagues where he's on my bench, I could see that changing depending on how the top of the tight ends shake up. I think he's just a solid high floor option. And that's what I'm predicting for him for the whole year.
Yeah, like a 5-catch, 62-yard kind of guy. You know what I mean? That's Dalton Schultz in kind of a nutshell. And I think what's important about Schultz too is that last year, Dallas just kind of used the hell out of him because he had that contract. It was a 1-year contract, and now he's on the Texans, and he's also getting $10 million. So I think they're going to use him in this offense. When you have an unsure wide receiver room and you don't have the capability or resources to sign a number one wide receiver, you kind of go the other route and get a tight end. That's what the Bills did with Dalton Kincaid in the draft. They weren't able to get any of the slot receivers that they wanted, so they said, okay, let's add Kincaid, and he'll just kind of act like that guy for us. As for the Ravens, I'm super excited to see this Todd Monken offense. I got Lamar and Andrews in one league. Andrews is confirmed going to play. He's been practicing in a limited fashion. I'll not say confirmed, but he has been practicing. So hard to imagine Andrews not playing. As far as the receiver room goes, Odell Beckham currently dealing with an ankle injury that popped up. So going to get some mix of Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman in that running back room. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to have himself a week. I think he's been kind of hearing all the noise. He's looking for a contract. He's not getting it. So what are your thoughts on the Ravens side of things? There's not really too much else to add, I guess. But
well, let me just come out and say I have not been the biggest J.K. Dobbins guy for a couple of years now. And in our fantasy draft, I passed on J.K. Dobbins as my RB2 to take a shot at Jonathan Taylor. And then you took Dobbins with the next pick. So that decision might define how our season goes. But I think he's a good player, but the timing's never really been right with him. He's always been competing for touches with Gus Edwards, Latavius Murray, these other bodies in the Ravens running back room. And this year, it doesn't feel like it necessarily all the things are aligning in the right place. I don't think I might be in the minority here. I don't think it's a guarantee that this new offense is going to be better than their offense was under Greg Roman. I think it was time for a change. The Greg Roman offense has sort of reached its ceiling, but it's undeniable that offense was tailor-made for a quarterback like Lamar Jackson. He won MVP under it. He had that great year in 2019. I don't think it's a 100% guarantee that this offense is going to be explosive, especially right out of the gate. That on top of that, DeMeco Ryans, new head coach of the Texans, put together some insane defensive years for that 49ers defense a couple of years ago, all the way up to last year. I think this Texans defense could be improved. I'm still lightly advising to start J.K. Dobbins this week, but I don't think it's all sunshine and rainbows for him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he disappoints this week.
Interesting. Because it seems like kind of a slam, home run matchup for J.K. Dobbins against the Texans team that has struggled to stop the run over the last couple of years, especially when playing Derrick Henry. Next up here, we got the Buccaneers versus the Vikings. So Buccaneers side, this is the Baker Mayfield kind of team right now. So we got Mike Evans kind of dealing with the contract situation currently. I'm going to say that I like Chris Godwin and I like Rachaad White in this matchup. And other than that, I'm not excited about anyone else. I think Chris Godwin, 2 years now removed from that ACL injury, he's going to come back and he has potential to be a wide receiver one this year, even with Baker Mayfield. We know Mayfield has a tendency to check down, which I think can also benefit Rachaad White in this matchup. This is also Alexander Madison's debut as the Vikings starting running back. So a lot of interesting things happening here. Jordan Addison making his debut. I think Justin Jefferson is kind of already spoken for. There's no really point to kind of talk about that. TJ Hawkinson, there's no way you're sitting TJ Hawkinson this week. What is there anything else really to add on this matchup?
I'll just reiterate, I love Rachaad White this week. I think this is a great matchup with a small asterisk that Sean Tucker's been getting a lot of hype throughout camp in the preseason now, and it seems like he's already worked his way up to the RB2 position in Tampa, and we'll just have to monitor that usage. But I think Rachaad White has a great matchup. As you said, Baker Mayfield, the single most likely quarterback to throw a check down in the NFL. For some reason, on our Rachaad White post, we got a lot of comments saying Baker Mayfield doesn't throw to the running backs. He slings the ball. And I get why people have that mentality that he's some sort of gunslinger because he throws the ball very far when he wants to. But Baker Mayfield checks down more than any quarterback in the league. So Rachaad White has a good matchup. From the Vikings' point of view, you can't really bench TJ Hawkinson. You can't really bench Alexander Madison. I do think this is a tough matchup for both of them, actually, especially Madison going against this Bucs run defense that's been tops in the league for so many years. First game as a starter, not ideal for him. TJ Hawkinson will likely get matched up against Antoine Winfield, who they sort of bring lower into the box when they play against a star tight end like TJ Hawkinson. That doesn't mean I'm benching him by any means, but I'm just sort of tempering my expectations for him and Madison this week. Don't overreact to it if they have a bad week or a less than expected week. I do think this is going to open up looks for Jordan Addison potentially. So I would look out for him to be a decent, flex option in the wide receiver 25 to 30-ish range.
Range is good too. That's something we got to start doing. Give everybody a certain range of where they feel comfortable starting each wide receiver. But let's move into the Panthers versus Falcons game. So I'm just going to zoom by this one. Panthers, we got Bryce Young making his debut. Running back wise, we got Miles Sanders, who I'm fine with starting this week. I think he's actually a pretty decent matchup. Wide receiver wise, we have DJ Chark, currently ruled out this week. I already kind of precursor or mentioned this. Hayden Hurst, he's someone who I'm really looking at this week. If you're desperate for a Kelsey replacement, no DJ Chark. Adam Thielen is currently listed as questionable for this game. Jonathan Mingo, who knows how much work he's going to get. He's still a rookie. I'm kind of seeing the Jonathan Mingo arc looking like Christian Watson last year as just a raw player who needs time. And I think midway through the year, Jonathan Mingo is going to be the number one waiver wire pickup. And I think in the beginning of the year, he's going to be dropped or on waivers for a lot of teams. So that's how I see Jonathan Mingo kind of working out. This is also Bijan's first NFL game, a real NFL game, rather. Drake London making his appearance. Kyle Pitts hopefully making an appearance in this game. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But yeah, obviously you're starting Bijan. I think Drake London's a pretty good bet in this game as well. What are your thoughts?
I am not the biggest Desmond Ridder fan, so I'll start with that. I think that this Falcons offense is going to be entirely reliant on the run game, and they did sort of build their team that way. They picked Drake London over Garrett Wilson, which is obviously a bit ridiculous, but Drake London will go down and block for you, and I think the Falcons want to run the football, and that's going to be the identity of this team. So Bijan Robinson, that's why he's going top 7, 8 in fantasy drafts this year. It's because he's going to get that ball a lot. As a general rule this season, I'm going to guess, obviously we haven't seen any games yet, that if your team can stop the run, you're going to be able to stop this Falcons offense. And that's why I like streaming the Panthers defense this week. I drafted them in a lot of my fantasy leagues just because they had this matchup week 1, and I think they can stop the run. And I think the Falcons are going to struggle to throw the ball in this game. If they do, who knows who's going to get the ball? Drake London, Kyle Pitts are both in there. Those are really the main 2 options. One of them will probably have a good game each week, most weeks this year. From the Panthers side, as you said, Miles Sanders has a good matchup. I think this is good for him. Drafted him as your RB2 flex in most leagues, and I think that's about what you're going to get from him most weeks. He seems to be the bell cow in Carolina. They don't really have
not really anything behind him that you're getting worried about. Chuba Hubbard, Raheem Blackshear, no one that really kind of jumps out at you, and it's like, oh, you got to be careful. But that's all right. Next matchup, Cardinals Commanders. Luke, you said you had some good dirt on this one. Why don't you start this one off?
This matchup looks really boring on paper, but I think this is just about the best way that a 5th-round pick who has one NFL game under his belt can start his first full season as starter. The Cardinals defense is, if you just look at that team on paper, I think you'd be surprised at just how many players they have on their defense that you probably couldn't even name. It's very likely to be a mess. I mean, Jonathan Gannon's been getting all this negative press all offseason as well, the new head coach for the Cardinals. And just yesterday, that report dropped that he came out and said, I'm the reason the Eagles lost the Super Bowl last year. And that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in the Cardinals defense going into week 1 either. So that being said, Sam Howell, whatever you think of him as a player, this is just about the best you're going to get from him in a first game. And I love a lot of Washington players in this game, especially Jahan Dotson. I think there's going to be room for him to have a big game, especially Terry McLaurin seems to be healthy and ready for this game. But, just coming off the toe injury, those could always be a little bit of a problem. So Jahan Dotson's probably my favorite, maybe low hype start in this game. I think people are sleeping on Jahan Dotson in week 1. I think Washington's defense is going to be set to have a big game. I just don't really see a world where Josh Dobbs comes into this room and puts together some sort of great performance against a pretty solid Washington defense. I mean, we know what that defensive line can do. They revamped the secondary this offseason. The only Cardinal I'm even thinking about putting in a lineup is James Conner, and that's really going to be off of usage alone because, as I just said, the Washington defensive line is going to eat this Cardinals offensive line.
What about Marquise Brown?
I guess in a deep league.
Please don't.
I guess in deep leagues, but again, I just don't see a world where Joshua Dobbs comes in and is slinging the ball around. I just don't want any piece of this passing game this week.
I think of it almost as like this is going to be a team that's going to be forced to throw the ball in a lot of games this year. And as far as receiving options go, Marquise Brown, it's like they don't really have much without DeAndre Hopkins. You got Rondale Moore, but I don't know how involved he's going to be. So I think we're going to see Dobbs force the ball a lot to Marquise Brown. I think there's going to be games where Brown has 10, 12 targets. Maybe he catches like 6 of them for like 40 yards. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of player I imagine Marquise Brown being this season. Not a lot of touchdown upside, and not a lot of touchdown upside with James Conner either, which I think is kind of the red flag for him of just being in this offense. You really have to hope he gets that receiving work. You really have to hope that he's efficient enough on the ground, which has also been an issue, that he can, kind of make it work. But let's jump into the Jaguars versus Colts. Jaguars side of the things, you got Trevor Lawrence doing his thing. No issues there. Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley. This is Luke. This is it. This is like what you've been waiting for the entire offseason. Calvin Ridley's debut. And you're lucky the Giants game isn't until late at night. This way you can focus just solely on this game and just watching Calvin Ridley do his thing. I think Calvin Ridley's in for a great matchup. This Colts defense, I think you kind of related to Arizona, where you look at the secondary and you're like, what is going on here? There's a lot of guys who are not with the team anymore. So yeah, I would say that for this Colts secondary, their best piece is probably Kenny Moore, and Kenny Moore covers the nickel. And where we're going to see Calvin Ridley line up is probably going to be more so on the outside. So we'll see Christian Kirk seeing a lot of Kenny Moore. But on the outside, Calvin Ridley's basically going to have free range. I'm excited to see what he's going to do in this matchup. On the flip side of things, Anthony Richardson making his NFL debut as well. A lot of NFL debuts here. What is this running back room going to look for? Who cares? Wide receiver room, Michael Pittman, what's going to go on there? Tight ends, you got no Jelani Woods. What are your thoughts here?
Yep, I'm hoping for a huge start to this Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley era. I have Calvin Ridley in both of my dynasty leagues. I've been sitting waiting for this for over a year, almost 2 years now. I can't wait to watch this game. Even Trevor Lawrence, I don't want to like toot my own horn. This is more of a sort of past record thing. I had Patrick Mahomes in that 2018 season, his first year playing when he won MVP. I had Lamar Jackson the year after that. That's 2 QB1s in a row. I had Kyler Murray the year after that.
Ooh.
And then Matthew Stafford was my guy the year after that. And last year I sort of had an off year. I took a lot of Russell Wilson last year, so that was a little bit tough. But the single quarterback that I have the most of in any league this year has been Trevor Lawrence. I've been a big fan of going for one of the top 8 fantasy quarterbacks, as I know you have been, because they're sort of just a tier above, 2 tiers above everybody else. And Lawrence seems to be the one going 8th out of those 8. So I've ended up with a lot of Trevor Lawrence. I think he's a great player. I think he's poised to have an insane year. I think his name can be thrown around in the MVP conversation this year, even in this stacked AFC. And this is a great first matchup to start.
I agree. We're going to see Trevor Lawrence do his thing this year. Let's move on to the 49ers versus Steelers. Brock Purdy officially back as a starter for this team. However that happened. Running back wise, Christian McCaffrey, he's supposed to be healthy. So, he'll give you a Christian McCaffrey type game. Wide receiver wise, Brandon Ayuk and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. What are we looking for these two in this matchup? Because Steelers have been known to have pretty tough defense. I got Ayuk in a couple of leagues. I've been bouncing between Ayuk and Jahan Dotson in one specific league. So what are your thoughts here on the 49ers wide receiver room?
Look, we talked about this last year with the 49ers. I think you're going to see it a lot with them again this year, as well as the Bengals. You have 4 players who are all going to be fantasy productive. Probably even 2 or 3 at once are going to have super good weeks. And it's just going to be a headache trying to pick which ones are going to do well in any given week. And that's why it's just a headache for fantasy owners. It's very exciting to watch on TV, but if you're a fantasy owner of any of these guys, you're just pulling your hair out all season. I would start Jahan Dotson. As I said, I'm a pretty big fan of Jahan Dotson this week. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think the tough matchup means much against a 49ers offense that seems to be matchup proof. It doesn't seem to matter who they play against. They run the same exact plan out there every week. We're going to run halfback stretch, halfback toss, and crossing routes. And it seems to work every time, no matter who's throwing the ball to who. But as I said, that who's catching the ball seems to be a mystery most weeks. As for the Steelers, Kenny Pickett had a really good preseason. George Pickens had a really good preseason as well. And I think this is about the worst case scenario for them to run into week 1. Nick Bosa just signed his contract. your offensive line still isn't very good. It feels like the Steelers' offensive line has been pretty bad for years now, since Pouncey and DeCastro retired. But yeah, this kind of stinks for Kenny Pickett, who has all this momentum going for him right now, running into this 49ers offense week 1, the consensus fantasy defense / special teams one. I do have a little bit to say about George Pickens. I imagine you do too. We've kind of been pushing this most of the offseason. I do think Deontay Johnson is going to remain this team's wide receiver 1. I think he's going to be that same guy who eats up 40% of the Steelers' targets, as he has been in the past few years, especially last year. Didn't even score a touchdown and was still fantasy relevant last year. George Pickens doesn't have that quick separation ability that Deontay Johnson has. He doesn't have that run after catch ability that Deontay Johnson has. And while Pickens is a good player in his own right, and he's an exciting player, everybody seems to be on the George Pickens train this year. I'm not overly excited from a fantasy perspective, especially this week in such a tough matchup.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another player that we should be really weary of is Najee Harris. I mean, this is a tough matchup. Jaylen Warren has been rumored to be as involved as ever this offseason. So, yeah, I'm likely staying away from Najee. This is probably going to be a Deontay Johnson 11 target type of game where they just keep trying to force it to him to move the ball. I think Pat Freeman will get pretty involved as well. But let's speed things up here. I'll run through the Saints and Titans real quick. Talked about Chico Okonkwo already. We talked about Juwan Johnson. Both of those guys being decent options. I'm starting DeAndre Hopkins. You know, if you got him, this is the same message of if you drafted him this early, you're using him. Running back wise, Derrick Henry, no question there. For the Saints side of the ball, I think Jamal Williams is in a good spot, you know, especially right now with Kendre Miller injured. And then you have Alvin Kamara on suspension. So I'm going to say Jamal Williams is not a must start, but definitely a good start for this week and a good matchup against the Titans. Wide receiver wise for the Saints, Chris Olave, your guy. No, is he not your guy? No, it's Alex. Alex's guy, Chris Olave. But yeah, so Chris Olave, he's got a good matchup this week against the Titans. They're still trying to figure out their corner situation. Yeah, I mean, that's really all there is to add. Do you see Michael Thomas as being this like, okay, I need a flex play? Do I play Michael Thomas this week?
Funny story. The beginning of the fantasy season, I was like, oh, Michael Thomas going in like this 9th, 10th round range. This is interesting. I may as well just take a shot. Like, why not? And I feel like as the offseason progressed and more fantasy drafts started happening and the internet started getting active into fantasy again, I kind of got bullied out of taking Michael Thomas in any league. Seems like just about everyone on the internet is so anti-Michael Thomas. I think, again, he's obviously a good player. I mean, he had one of the second greatest receiving season of the past 10 years, maybe. That 2019 season he had was incredible. I had him in fantasy that year. That was a fun time. You just can't bet on him to stay healthy. And even if he stays healthy, Chris Olave, I feel like, is likely going to be the number 1 target in this offense. We already talked about how Derek Carr likes his tight ends as well. There's definitely upside in Michael Thomas. I'm certainly not expecting it to come out this week.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that. Moving on to the Raiders and Broncos. Josh Jacobs got his contract. He's playing. I'm starting Josh Jacobs. Broncos have been abysmal against the run over the last couple of years. Wide receiver wise, Devontae Adams, not even a question. Outside of that, I'm not interested in anyone from this Raiders room. For the Broncos side of the ball, and you know, Adams is actually a little interesting too because, gosh, what is that name for that corner for the Broncos? Why can't I?
Pat Surtain.
Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain was one of the best cover corners in the NFL last year. So going against Adams, that's going to be a spot where they're going to have to try to force the ball to Adams, as the Raiders have over the last year. But it's going to be interesting to see with this Josh McDaniels revamped Patriots from Walmart offense. Is Jacoby Myers going to be involved? Is this a game where like Jacoby Myers just like has a game for some reason because Pat Surtain is all over Devontae Adams? And on the flip side of the ball, we keep hearing about how good Javonte Williams look. We keep hearing about how involved Javonte Williams is going to be, how Sean Payton is going to say he's going to be involved in the offense. Jerry Jeudy, still unsure whether he's going to play this game, although it's still trending that he's not going to. You have Cortland Sutton, who's probably going to be the wide receiver 1 on this team for week 1. Greg Dulcich, a deeper option when it comes to the tight end room. If you're looking for a replacement for Travis Kelce, like Dulcich and Hayden Hurst are like deeper options if you're looking in that way. So who in this offense are you excited about to watch in this game?
I will say that Jerry Jeudy's been practicing this week. I have a lot of investments in Jerry Jeudy this year. I'm looking forward to him being fully healthy and playing. So if I were them, I hope he doesn't play, honestly, just to give that hamstring an extra week. We have a lot of receivers going down with hamstring issues right now, and I don't want that to be a problem for the whole season.
And Darren Waller just now questionable for Sunday night's game due to a hamstring injury.
Shocker. Jerry Jeudy was the wide receiver 22 last year, and I don't think the Broncos offense can get much worse than it was last year. As a matter of fact, I don't think it can get worse at all. So I'm very excited about Jerry Jeudy, and if he plays, I'm going to have him in my lineups, but I'm kind of secretly hoping he doesn't, actually.
What about Sutton?
Sutton, you kind of know what you're getting. If Jeudy doesn't play, then yeah, I'm starting Sutton. But if Jeudy does play, he's going to be the wide receiver 2 in the offense. He'll probably have the second most targets, but it's just not very exciting. Javonte Williams, I kind of have in that same boat that I have J.K. Dobbins in. It's just that we've been waiting for so long, and it seems like the cards just haven't aligned at the right time. I'm just not very excited. I actually have Javonte Williams in both of my dynasty leagues as well. I guess that's what I was thinking 3-4 years ago when I drafted the teams. Wow. And it's gone very downhill from there. So I have more hope for him than I have for J.K. Dobbins, I think. But I'm just not excited about Javonte at all.
Talking about not excited, what about my Patriots going up against the Super Bowl Philadelphia Eagles? Although they didn't win, they obviously made it there for a reason. For the Eagles side of the ball, I really want to see how this running back room shakes out. You got DeAndre Swift, you got Rashad Penny, you got Kenneth Gainwell. We'll see, who ends up being the head horse in this matchup. I think this is a really good spot for Devontae Smith to have himself a game. I think the Patriots, what they do best is they take away your number one option, and right now that's A.J. Brown. So they're going to put Christian Gonzalez on A.J. Brown. They're going to test him. They'll probably give him a little bit of safety help. They're going to try to eliminate A.J. Brown from this game, which in turn is going to open up Devontae Smith for a barrage of passes. And we know he's a great separator. We know he's a great receiver. I would be shocked if Devontae Smith is not a top 5 to 10 wide receiver this week. I'll be playing him in DFS. I'll be putting him in any lineups that I have him in. But yeah, I'm very high in Devontae Smith this year. And it seems to be a constant thing with the Patriots where when they take away your number one weapon, they rely on guys like Devontae Smith to kind of take over that offense. So I think this is a good game for Devontae Smith. If you have Dallas Goedert, again, you drafted him early. Why are you not starting him? For the Patriots side of the ball, Ramondre Stevenson did not practice today due to an undisclosed reason, but he is expected to play. So no real concern there for Ramondre Stevenson. Wide receiver-wise, I'm not excited about Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm not really excited about anybody else on this team. It's really just Ramondre right now until we see how everything shakes out. I'm excited to see if my prediction with Devontae Parker and Juju Smith comes true, to where I think Devontae Parker is going to outproduce Juju Smith-Schuster. Devontae Parker is coming off a 3-year, $33 million contract, and he seemed to be good last year when they got rolling. And this is the first time the Patriots have an offensive coordinator with Mac Jones. Yay! So we'll see how this turns out. Any additional thoughts for this game?
You hit on all my points with the Patriots. I said I'm even lower on Ramondre Stevenson because this Eagles defense is just stifling. But I am, in general, excited that the Patriots offense has, someone who coaches offense coaching them.
Hey,
it's a big improvement. And the Eagles are another one of those teams. I mentioned the Niners and Bengals before. The Eagles, I think they were really the ones last year. You had Devontae Smith, you had Dallas Goedert, and you had A.J. Brown. And you just it was pretty much you throw up a prayer on which ones are going to play well for fantasy that week. And that sounds about right.
Yeah, well, let's go to this Rams-Seahawks game. The Rams side of the ball, Cam Akers. I think this is a pretty good chance to use Cam Akers. That Seahawks defense still needs a lot of work done. They re-added Bobby Wagner to the lineup, so we'll see how that plays out. But for the most part, I don't think the Seahawks defense is complete by any means. With that being said, Cooper Kupp out this week. I think Tyler Higbee, you're firing him up. If you're desperate for a flex play, Van Jefferson could be your guy, but keep an eye on Puka Nacua. I think he's going to end up getting a bigger role. And if Cooper Kupp ends up being on IR for 4 weeks, I think Puka is going to be a pretty common waiver wire pickup with his potential involvement in this offense. On the Seahawks side of the ball, Kenneth Walker, he's limited. He's likely going to play. On top of that, Geno, I think is a great opportunity for Geno. Again, this Rams defense is not the same defense that we're used to seeing other than Aaron Donald, right? No more. Wow. Dude, I can't remember any names today. Who is Jalen Ramsey? Jesus Christ. They no longer have Jalen Ramsey. They're really stretched thin, especially with the linebacker position. They just lost Bobby Wagner. So there's a lot not going right for this Rams defense right now. I think this is a game where you can start Kenneth Walker. You can start DJ. Almost said DJ Khaled. Do you believe that? You can start DK Metcalf. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be making his debut after the injury. I'm probably not going to start him in this one, but there is still a chance that he just comes through and makes a big play, especially against this defense. Tyler Lockett, I think, is relatively safe in this matchup as well. Anything else to add?
I just put a note that we saw what the Chiefs looked like without Travis Kelce yesterday, and that's with Patrick Mahomes. Imagine what this Rams offense is going to look like without Cooper Kupp. Just
without Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, it's going to be ugly. And I picked Matt Stafford really in like my 2 quarterback leagues. I loved Matt Stafford as a QB3. In that Super Bowl season, I said I had him then. He was great with Cooper Kupp there and other players. And now you just don't have any of that. And nobody is dependable on that Rams offense. I did put a little note about Cam Akers, another one of these guys in that same sort of boat as Javonte and J.K. Dobbins. I'm just not excited. This is a pretty good matchup for him, but he's also just about the only thing the Rams offense has going for him. So I'm sure the Seahawks will be all over it.
Yeah, and that was a different story last year for most of the season where they were going away from Cam Akers, and then they ended up coming back to him at one point. So we'll see how Sean McVay is feeling tomorrow. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you got Miami Dolphins versus Los Angeles Chargers. This is going to be what I expect to be the highest scoring game this week. I think both defenses still need some work. I believe Jalen Ramsey's not going to be ready for this game. Last I checked. So outside of that, I think this is the game to start Raheem Mostert, which is funny to say and pains me to say. But you got Jeff Wilson on IR for 4 weeks. You got first game for Devon Achane, and he's listed as the running back 3 in the depth chart right now. So I think if you have to pick someone on this offense, in this running back room, it's going to be Raheem Mostert. And then after this week, if Raheem Mostert has a good game, which is very possible, I am selling him like there's no tomorrow. And Luke, you're in a couple leagues, so it pains me to say this, but I was definitely, you were one of the people who I was going to just keep throwing offers to, although you wouldn't bite. But yeah, so if I'm starting Raheem Mostert. I have him in a couple leagues, actually. I'm going to end up starting him as a flex play. I think he's a fantastic flex play, potential high-end RB2 this week. And then I'm selling him immediately after this week. The matchups are not going to be any better. Chargers defense has always been abysmal against the run. Wide receiver-wise, of course, you're starting Tyreek Hill. Of course, you're starting Jalen Waddle. And on the flip side, of course, you're starting Herbert. Of course, you're starting Austin Eckler. Of course, you're starting Mike Williams. Of course, you're starting Keenan Allen. And then Gerald Everett, a guy that I talked about before, who I think is in a really good opportunity to score a touchdown if you need that Kelce replacement. Top 5 in red zone targets last year, and he's got a great matchup against the Miami Dolphins. I'm just going to skip to the Packers and Bears here before my computer dies because the battery's not going up. But Packers and Bears, Mr. Jordan Love, tell me about it. What are you expecting from this game?
So that little quarterback spiel I went on before, I was actually going to go on that at this point because I'm a big believer, right? I think Jordan Love played great in the 1 or 2 games we saw from him so far. He was kind of thrown into a tough situation that one game at Arrowhead where his mom was sitting in the literal last row in the entire stadium. He had a tough game, but I don't think he was awful in that game either. Maybe not right away, but this Bears defense is terrible. I hate to put it that way, but it's very, very bad. And I don't see why the Packers can't have a good game. And that's if their receivers play, because as I said before, these hamstring issues, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs both dealing with hamstring problems right now. I see they're both questionable. I don't know if they practiced today.
So Romeo Doubs actually practiced yesterday and he practiced today. So Romeo Doubs looks like he's good to go. Christian Watson, he had his helmet with him, but apparently he's wearing sneakers today. So it doesn't sound like Christian Watson is going to line up for this week 1.
Yeah, and that's a problem with Christian Watson, who so much of his game is that speed, and the hamstring injury is just going to be a pain for Christian Watson owners. But yeah, I think the Packers offense should look all right. Just even if you don't have faith in Jordan Love, and even if Christian Watson sits, there's just going to be such a mismatch between the line play that I think the Packers offense is going to score points. I love Aaron Jones this week. From the Bears side, I think the running back situation, the usage is going to be interesting to monitor, at least. I think Khalil Herbert will likely start off getting a lot of the snaps, similar to what we saw from the Lions yesterday.
With Montgomery.
Khalil Herbert got almost all the snaps in the preseason with the starters. I don't know if I expect that to continue for the whole year. I'll let you kind of get into that. And just one more note on the Bears offense quickly is that DJ Moore might be the only thing they have going for them in the passing game. I could see him with like 35-40% target share, similar to the Deontay Johnsons, stuff like that.
Yeah, and as we saw in preseason too, it only takes one play for a guy like DJ Moore being explosive as he is. So if that volume's coming, even if it's not even if it's not Justin Fields making the play, it could still be DJ Moore making that play. So outside of that, Roshan, I think he's going to have a slow start to the year. What else is I going to say? But yeah, from the Packers team with no Christian Watson, I think Romeo Doubs is a good option this week, especially Jaden Reed. I don't know how excited I am about him, but let's go into this Cowboys-Giants game as we kind of start to wrap up here. For the Giants side of things, we just mentioned that Darren Waller dealing with a hamstring injury. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I if I had a guess, I would guess that he's probably going to play, but that totally blindsided me. I wasn't expecting him to be hurt already. Not that Darren Waller is the pinnacle of health or anything, but Darren Waller was by far the focal point of this offense in the preseason. I mean, Daniel Jones was throwing, it felt like every other pass Darren Waller's way in the limited snaps they had together. And if he doesn't play, I'm likely going to stay away from everybody on this Giants offense except Saquon. There's just too many heads there. I know we've been on the Isaiah Hodgins trek all off season trying to pitch this to people that he's the only big physical X receiver the Giants have. We've been saying it for months at this point, it feels like. But until we see it first, I'm not throwing him in a starting lineup right now.
Yeah, I got Hodgins obviously in a lot of leagues right now, but I'm not overly excited about week 1. I want to see it first. I want to see him continue what he was doing last year before I trust him in my lineup. But I think there's still a chance that he could kind of come out swinging in week 1 and be that guy, especially if Darren Waller's dealing with an injury. So on top of that, the Cowboys side, Tony Pollard, hammering him in all my lineups, potentially in DFS as well. CeeDee Lamb, of course, I think is also a great option. Jake Ferguson. Do we feel like Jake Ferguson is kind of a deeper option if you need a tight end replacement this week?
I've been kind of, I don't know if I would call myself a Jake Ferguson truther, but I kind of have faith in Jake Ferguson. He feels like the same type of player as Dalton Schultz. He just feels dependable out there. And we saw that a little bit last season. Now that he's the starting tight end, I don't see why he can't produce any given week, especially a week like this one. The Giants defense, you know, they love to blitz, and the Cowboys are going to be needing to get the ball out quickly. And that typically goes to either your number one, who's CeeDee Lamb, and I'm all over CeeDee Lamb in this one, or your tight end. And in that case, it's Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to end it off here with the Bills versus Jets on Monday Night Football. Aaron Rodgers making his New York Jets debut. For the Jets side of the ball, Breece Hall, Dalvin Cook, that's going to be the big question heading into week 1. You don't really have questions about Garrett Wilson. On the Bills side of the ball, Is James Cook going to be the guy for this team? I'm likely starting James Cook in all the leagues I have. This is going to be a tough matchup, but at the same time, it's about where you drafted him, right? He's going to be a flex play / RB2 for a lot of the teams that drafted him. So I'm going to be rolling with James Cook. Wide receiver wise, Stephon Diggs. I think Gabriel Davis is kind of sneaky in this one. We're going to have sauce all over Stephon Diggs. You're going to, Josh Allen's going to have other options out there. Gabriel Davis getting a lot of talk this offseason about finally being healthy. He dealt with an ankle sprain last year, and that kind of ruined his production last year, so to speak. So, yeah, I think Gabriel Davis is a sneaky flex play in this one. Dalton Kincaid, I'm not ready to throw into my lineup yet, but I really want to hone in on this Dalvin Cook, Breece Hall kind of thing, because I have Dalvin Cook in one league. I have no shares of Breece Hall. He was being drafted way too early this offseason. And then even at the end of the offseason, with Dalvin Cook being signed, Breece Hall was still a third-round pick. So what do you think about this running back room? Do you trust Breece Hall right off the bat? Are you throwing Dalvin Cook in your lineup right off the bat? What are you looking at this week?
Well, let me start off by saying that I have 0 shares of Dalvin Cook and 0 shares of Breece Hall because I just didn't want to deal with it. But that being said, last season I was all over Breece Hall. I thought he was a great player coming out of college, and he showed it. He was probably ahead of his teammate Garrett Wilson in the Offensive Rookie of the Year voting until he went down with the torn ACL. But now I'm not convinced that we're not going to see a lot of Dalvin Cook. These teams where, all the veterans kind of flock to go play with Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, they tend to like to play those veterans, which means that Dalvin Cook is probably going to get used a lot, even though I think Breece Hall at this point is a better player. I'm staying away from both of them right now. I do think Aaron Rodgers to Garrett Wilson, I think that connection is going to get going early, and I'm really looking forward to watching that.
Yeah.
And besides that, just monitoring the running back usage, but I don't feel comfortable with either of them in a fantasy lineup right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if anything, I can make the argument for Dalvin Cook just because this is the first game Breece Hall back from an ACL injury, so they might lean on Dalvin a little more. But yeah, not overly excited about either of these guys. But Luke, thank you so much for joining me. As usual, guys, reminder, you can sign up for Underdog using code ANALYST, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $100. Best of luck. Hit the microphone. Best of luck this week. Guys, let us know how you do. We'll be back next week to recap week 1 and give you all the insight on week 2. So, Luke, thank you again for joining me, and we'll see you guys next week.